Hi everyone, this is Danielle, and I wanted to give a little bit of a screencast video on the writing process in response to your blog that you did for Module 1 on the writing process, the blog titled How Do You Write? Because I thought everyone did a really good job. It was really fun and interesting to read through your methods for getting started with the writing process. And then everybody wrote about their kind of ideal environmental conditions. You talked about what has not worked for you in the past and what you prefer. And then there were some really good tips for writing that some of you provided. And then I'm also going to talk about, what is the writing process and give you kind of my own experience. I have a very contentious relationship, very long contentious relationship with writing. So and what I did here, so this is a cumulative document. I'm actually going to make it a little bit bigger so you can see. It's a cumulative document that I created. So as I was reading each of your blog posts, I pulled out information that you were writing down, and then every time another student noted the same thing, I would put an asterisk next to it so you can see which things were really popular among all of you, and then which things were maybe kind of not as popular. And I'll try to go through most things, and then because I don't want this to be too long, and I have the habit of talking for a really long time, so I'm going to try to be as concise as possible. That being said, my writing is like my talking. I'm a very wordy writer, so editing for concision, which is trying to write concisely, has been a key part of trying to be a better writer throughout my life. So something that I'm consistently working on. I'm a better writer than I am a speaker, and it is just how I am. So it's just how my brain works. So okay, so first, before I get to the great things that you guys talked about in that blog, I'm just going to kind of go over what on earth is this thing we call the writing process. You may have heard about it before, you may not have heard about it before. It's clear from what the majority or all of you wrote about is that you're either explicitly aware of it or you are implicitly aware of it, but that you are to some degree engaging in the writing process. And you may be engaging in it and not being aware of it. So there are a gazillion books and peer-reviewed articles written about what is the writing process, because that's what we always talk about when we talk about writing. We always talk about and we teach the writing process. So what is it? It is a very difficult thing to teach. I'll say that. It's not only difficult to do as a writer, and I always call my students writers. You are all writers, because I very cheesily use the very famous kind of adage of there's no such thing as good writers. There's only such thing as good rewriters. And that's, to me, what writing is, right? It's not, we don't do good writing, we do good rewriting. And that's revision. Revision is to me, the most important thing in writing. And it's the most difficult, because you really have to reckon with yourself, and it's a very difficult thing to do. But the writing process really comes down to these four key things that I've got noted here: pre-writing, drafting, revising, and editing. Seems simple, right? Four things? Sure. Easy enough to do. Nope. Totally messy. In the writing process, as I'm sure you're all aware, or aware of, at least implicitly, as you've done writing in the past, it's messy. Writing is a messy process, whether it's creative writing, whether it's email writing, whether it's technical or professional writing, or you're writing for your work. It's, even writing a CV, right, which is professional writing. CV or resume, cover letters, looking for jobs, anything like that. That's all. It's all messy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, as briefly as I can, each part, and that's kind of the purpose of the the readings in the beginning of this class is to kind of get you to kind of really challenge yourself to think about your relational dynamic with writing. Um, and I know a lot of people talk about, well, I don't write for fun, and I don't do that. I don't write for fun either. So, and I can't remember the last time I've written for fun. And I know people who are creative writers. I'm a literature person. I'm a Shakespearean, meaning I analyze Shakespeare for a living. But I know people who publish chapbooks or poetry books, right, or publish creative writing, and their work is painful, it looks like. So these are people who are writing creative writing, and it is based on my conversations with them. That creative writing is a painful process because they also go through this very similar process of pre-writing, drafting, revising, and editing. You might throw in workshopping or craft. With creative writing, there's a few different things that they do, but it's they're not necessarily writing it for fun, right? So writing it is an art. It's also a little bit of a science, especially when we get into APA. Then you have more of a science to it when you get into argumentative writing, like what we'll be doing kind of in the middle of the class with the classical argument paper. Then writing becomes a little bit more of a science because there's very specific things that you have to do in the process. So pre-writing, and some of you have already identified some pre-writing strategies, these methods for getting started with the writing process. And, and based on on a lot of the introductions that I read, a lot of people talked about, I'm overwhelmed and I don't always know how to get started. And those are all super normal. And I feel the same way. Anytime I have a writing project, it's always like, I don't know what to do. I know that I have this writing project, but what do I do with it? So it's not the easiest thing to do. There are a lot of strats or strategies to help kind of get over that initial hurdle of the feeling of being overwhelmed or having no idea what to do. And a lot of you noted them. So, and they are talked about in our textbook as well. And some of you talk about in this blog, right? The unstructured versus the structured type of pre-writing. I, as a writer, don't explicitly tell myself I'm doing unstructured pre-writing. Like, I never identify which parts of the writing process I'm in just because that doesn't work for me anymore. I think because I've been writing for too long. So I just, it's a very different relationship I have. But pre-writing, even though it's called pre-writing, and I think I've said this to a few people that, even though it's called pre-writing, practices or what we call strategies often take place across the entire writing process except editing. So there is a difference between revising and editing. Editing is when you're completely done and you're just doing that, what a lot of people call proofreading. So editing is just where you're going through and making sure those sentence level things are correct, right? It's like what a copy editor does or an editor does. So, you're just making sure spelling is correct, punctuation is correct, grammatically things are correct, syntactically, meaning the order of words makes sense. That's at the sentence level. So that's saved by that point. When you've reached this part of the writing process, you should be done with everything else. Because in the real world of editing, where books are written and that type of thing, if an editor gets something and sees that something else is not done, they immediately send it back and say, I can't edit this because something is missing. Information is missing here, or this is not good enough for me to edit it. It hasn't been revised enough for it to be in the editing stage. So pre-writing, like I said, even though it's called pre-writing doesn't stop when you go into the drafting phase. And that's because the writing process is what we call recursive. And recursive just means back and forth. So there's a lot of push and pull tension between writing. So, say you do something like what a lot of people talk about here, right? There's brainstorming, um, ideas on a notepad. These are all, and I'm going to highlight all of the very explicit kind of pre-writing activities, or not activities. That sounds fun. Sorry. Uh, Strategies that people have identified. So, I mean, anything with selecting a topic, and it's kind of pre-writing, but not really, because you're not really engaging in the actual thought. That the topic choosing happens before the pre-writing. Sometimes, if you're having topic selection as its own kind of issue or strategy in writing, that's kind of separate from the writing process itself. But if you're engaging in outlining, you can see that there are several of you who practice outlining, brainstorming ideas on a notepad. I Being as old as I am now, I have carpal tunnel in both my hands, so I can no longer really do things on notepads because writing too long takes too long. If I do anything, if I'm having a real complication with pre-writing, I will, or even later in the writing process, I'll get poster board and markers, and I will create a giant conceptual map, or concept map, or do something like clustering, because I need a big space to visualize what I'm doing, and I can't do it in a small space because of my physical. I'll get in pain really quick from the writing, and so I'm just kind of limited because of my hands. Free writing, very, very useful pre-writing practice, and I'll talk a little bit more about what free writing is a little bit later on. Excellent for writer's block, excellent for being feelings of overwhelmingness, and a lot of people talked about free writing without realizing they were talking about free writing. Research is, a lot of people talked about research as something they do in the kind of early stages, which is great because research is a pre-writing practice, but it's also a practice that you go back to again and again and again. It's a recursive process. So, right, so there's those practices that I talked about, right? There's free writing, there's outlining. These are those I'm not going to remember all of them. There's clustering, there's mind mapping, there's cubing, there's the concept maps, which I like. I don't do them very often, but research. And research is actually divided into informal, which is like Google, and then there's formal, which are the library databases. So research is actually divided into two different types of research, informal and formal research. So, and they're both considered pre-writing. So so when I say they're practiced across except for this, I'm just going to strike this out because I'm not going to talk about editing because, like I already said, editing is that very last part where you're focused on just polishing it at the sentence level. Everything else, big scale, should be finished by that point. The recursivity of it, or that back and forth pool, is say I've chosen my topic, I've done some pre-writing. I don't even know how much pre-writing I do. I think I do a little bit of I think I just dive right into writing, honestly, at this point. I do research. This is probably the primary and maybe only um, pre-writing I do, or pre-writing strategy I do, because before I do anything, I need to know what the research is saying before my topic. So before I'm writing about whatever it is I'm writing about, I need to have some concept of my argument. Um, and and I will just put that down here. So having some idea of your argument, and that's what you're doing in this course. You're doing argumentative writing, understanding what the research says on your topic, which will help you kind of formulate where you sit in, like where you can position yourself within the research. We use phrases like carving yourself a space within the research to situate yourself. So, situating yourself is a really common phrase when we talk about writing, especially argumentative writing. Um, but also for and understanding what the research says, meaning you don't just want to repeat what somebody's already argued, because it's like those arguments are already being made. So what's the point of just reiterating what somebody's already said? So that's another reason why you have to understand what we call the landscape or the terrain of, yeah, we use a lot of fun metaphors of what the research actually is. Um, but research can better help guide you in terms of where you want to go with your writing. So that's probably, for me, the only type of pre-writing I do. And then from there, with research, I do what's called active reading and annotating. Heavy, heavy, heavy. I'm very heavy on this in my pre-writing. Um, and this means understanding the research. And I'll usually create a document. It's usually a Google Doc, where um, I'll create a citation. I usually write in MLA or Chicago, but for this class it would be an APA, of the source, and start pulling quotations that I think would be helpful in understanding the source, or the data, right? The actual research that I'm looking at, and B, helpful in supporting an argument that I'm making, or C, helping to work as the opposition, right? Right, would be a demonstration of the opposition, because that's something else that you're doing. That it's also very normal in argumentative research that you have to address the counter argument or the opposition, because, as somebody noted very aptly in the tips to writing, is that understanding the opposition is key to any topic, which is so true, and you have to do it. So, or D, helping to refute the opposition. So when you bring in opposition, right, you don't just bring in opposition, but then you also have to refute it. Because again, writing is, especially argumentative writing, is incredibly aggressive. So you're constantly like, oh, you're saying this? Well, bye, because I have all of this credible research that I'm going to bury you with. pretty easily, and you have nothing to stand on. So my goal is to knock you down and cut you off at the knees, and that's what I'm gonna do. So it's kind of a dirty game, but that's the fun of it. So that's the main thing I do, because and so I'll have a document that will be just of my sources that I think I'm gonna use. It'll already have my kind of citation information that I can drop into my works cited or references page, whatever. And then every quotation, I'll put the in-text citation with it, and I'll just collate quotations. And I'll try to give obviously each quotation some context, and I'll put page numbers and, like I said, in-text citations, and I'll already have that ready to go. So that's what helps me the most when I'm prepping to write. If I am struggling after that, I might move into free writing. And that will help me to get the ball rolling. And free writing in its pure form is a timed strategy of 15 to 20 minutes where you give yourself a writing task and you don't stop writing the entire time. So if you don't time yourself, then now I have failed at this because sometimes I'll free write for 4 hours, and that's sometimes good and sometimes bad. Like I said, I've been writing for 20 years, so it's like I don't sometimes follow the rules anymore. But free writing in its proper form is usually about 20 minutes, and it's you time yourself, and the point is just write. If you write in lists, if you write like you talk, if you write in bad grammar, it doesn't matter. You can spell things wrong, it doesn't matter. Because again, as somebody very rightly gave a tip, is to not be ashamed or embarrassed about what you write. The best thing about writing is once you've written it, if you don't want to share, you can get rid of it and then move on about your day. It's brilliant tip. And it's so true. But free writing is also very helpful. Someone mentioned it, it helps to overcome writer's block. That's one of the other helpful things about free writing in theory. It's meant to help you get started, or if you're in the drafting and revision stage, again, this is where it gets to that back and forth. If you're in the draft, say you've got half a draft done and you're like, oh, I got writer's block. I don't know what to do from here. I've moved on to a new body paragraph that has a new claim, and I'm lost. You go back to pre-writing. Okay, I'm going to outline, or I'm going to free write. I'm just going to free write that, thing. This is what I think is important, right? You give yourself a writing task or a writing prompt, and you write the entire time. It could be 5 minutes. It could be 10 minutes, right? It doesn't matter. The point is you're writing. That's the only point to free writing. But besides that, I don't do anything. I don't outline. I'm not a linear thinker, which is why I'm not a good talker. I don't do any of the other things. But whatever works for you, do it. But research is really important. So I will always kind of emphasize that as research. And research also, drafting and revising, this is what we call a time sink. It not only takes a lot of time up front as a pre-writing practice in and of itself, but it's very easy to get trapped in it. So you could be, and a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but some people talked about how they write their introductions. Someone said that they write their introduction last. I have heard this many times before. This always blows my mind because I cannot do this. I have to have a full working introduction before I can move on. That's just how I am. For people who can write the intro last, because I always write an intro with the expectations that I'll go back in and revise it, because it has to be revised based on what I end up doing in the rest of my work. But I have to have something. Otherwise, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing if I don't have my argument kind of fleshed out. And that's the rhetorical purpose of the introduction, is to flesh out the argument. So if I don't have that written, at least in draft form, so that's why I don't understand the writing process where people write their introductions last. I'm just kind of like, well, then how do you know what you're writing about? So, or how do you know what's guiding you? So, but you could be in the drafting / revision stage and you could say, oh, do I need more information on this? And then you go back to researching. And then you research and you research and you research and you find more sources and you research and you research. And then you get trapped in the research cycle. And that happens to me all the time. That's one of my major writing flaws, is I get trapped in the research cycle. And maybe it's not just me. It happens to a lot of kind of seasoned writers, particularly seasoned academic writers, and that's because there's oftentimes so much research on what we're writing about. So it's like, oh, there's this source. I need to include it. Let me read it and take notes on it. Oh, there's also this source. Let me read it and take notes on it. Okay, I have to include all this information. Oh, this is also really important. And this is also really important. Oh, what about this one? And it's also, I think, subconsciously, it's also a distraction to keep you from writing. So I think it works. It's distracting, and so research is so foundational to the writing process, but at the same time, I think it subconsciously can work. It's important as a pre-writing practice. It's important to the recursive process of the writing process, but it can also work as a distraction, because you're like, oh, I'm doing all this important research, but I'm not writing. And then you just don't write. And so I've gone down that hole 100,000 times, and you end up not writing anything. So that's where that can be not helpful. So that's pre-writing. Drafting is when you've completed what's called a full draft. So you've gotten in an essay your intro, all your body paragraphs, and a conclusion. That's all drafting is. Well, not technically. Drafting and revision, you have to think of these again are recursive. You go back and forth between drafting and revising. You have a full draft, you revise it. You have another draft, you revise that. Then you have a new draft. Then you revise that. Then you have a new draft. Then you revise that one. Then you do that. Then you revise it, right? So you go back and forth, back and forth. That's that push and pull, back and forth, recursive process of the writing process. You know, there are writing projects, you know, where I've had 40 drafts of something. And the revision process, which is the most important process, is constituted by new research. It's constituted by free writing. It's constituted also by what's called another, it's technically not pre-writing, but it is pre-writing because I don't know where else it would go, but it's called reverse outlining. And reverse outlining is where if you're overwhelmed with a writing project, you create an outline based on the draft you have. So instead of creating an outline from nothing, you take the writing you have and you write an outline based on that. And that's why it's called reverse outlining. So that's where you've got a writing project and you're like, I don't know how to approach revision based on what I've got. And revision, remember, is a total re-envisioning of your work. Do I need to move paragraphs around? Do I need to trash something? Do I need to to bring in a whole new paragraph on this topic. And that's why I say it's not an easy practice, but it's the most important one. But reverse outlining is really helpful if you're overwhelmed with something, because it allows you to see in a very kind of bullet pointy way where you're currently at with your writing project. Okay, this is my introduction. This is what it talks about. This is my thesis statement. This is what I have as my first paragraph. Why do I have it as my first paragraph? What is my first paragraph arguing? What resources do I have to support it? Why do I have these quotations to support it? How am I analyzing them? How am I circling back to use those quotations to support my evidence, right? Here's my second paragraph. What is that arguing? Why do I have it as my second body paragraph, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So it forces you to kind of engage in those questions and challenge yourself in terms of the organization and why you're doing what you're doing in terms of the writing. So that's drafting and revising. So those are recursive in and of themselves, that where pre-writing strategies may be intermingled as you're revising to create a new draft, right? And then you look at that draft and you say, okay, well, what do I have to do to this draft to make it better? The idea of having one draft, revising it once, and then having another draft is so elementary that I don't like it. And that's just not how writing works. It's implied that that's what happens in this class, because it's like turn in a draft, get feedback, revise, submit a new draft, right? And we always call it a draft because writing is never finished. So you just call it a final draft. But inside of that, in theory, you should be doing more drafting, revising and drafting, fiddling with it, revising, drafting, fiddling with it, tinkering with it here and there, maybe going to the virtual communication lab, asking me questions, whatever. That's the genuine writing process. It's not just pre-write, draft, revise, edit. That's not how writing happens. So that's the writing process. So I'm going to go up to what everyone kind of talked about, and I'll try to go through this as quickly as possible, because again, I don't want this to have to be like super long. So I already talked a little bit about some of the pre-writing strategies that everyone talked about. I talked about the process of topics, and that's a slightly different, sorry, just getting emails. That's a slightly different section, not section, but it's a slightly different conversation that takes place before or just outside or adjacent to the writing process. I actually have a video that I made for the virtual communication lab that talks about using the library databases as a way to help you select a topic if you're ever having problems. A lot of people prefer to have, write about topics about which they are, have current knowledge about or have an interest in, which is not unusual. I'm the same. So, so you can see all the asterisks. So lots of people did that. I thought this is a really good idea for a method for writing, is using subject headers. You can, and in APA, you can actually formally use subject headers. So you don't have to use them just as a way to organize your writing, but you can actually use subject headers in your formal essays as a way to help organize your writing. And it also helps the reader understand to follow along with you. Understanding the audience is obviously a given, so I'm glad somebody brought that up. So you always need to understand who your audience is, and this also helps with organization. It helps with a lot of things. So proofreading, I talked about, that falls under the editing category of the writing process. I call this, some people talked about this, I call it the dump. It's sometimes I refer to it as free writing, but that's that kind of like where you just sit and you just dump everything onto a pad of paper or onto your computer, into a Word doc or a Google Doc. It's just, and that's why I call it free writing. Like when I say like, oh, I free wrote for 4 hours, like that's just me dumping information onto something that I then go back to. And I'm like, okay, well, I wrote, 5,000 words. Not all of it's great. There's some good potential in here. And then you go back to it and you kind of try to make it better or see if anything's worth salvaging or something like that. Somebody brought up eliminating personal bias, which I thought was interesting because, yes, you want to write in a way where you don't alienate the reader. And alienating the reader comes through a very clear demonstration of personal bias. However, you are implicitly writing with personal bias because you have an argument. So it is tricky to it's not tricky. It's just you have an argument, so we know what you're arguing for. So there is already an element of personal bias. And the whole shtick of argumentative writing is the argument of academic paper is just an opinion that's been formalized into an academic argument. So, but definitely eliminating personal bias. There's been times when I've had to tell students, your writing tone or writing style here is alienating the reader, or this is coming off as sexist or racist or something along those lines. And the student does not intend for that to happen. So it's just that I have to point it out to them. And then they're like, oh my God, I didn't mean to do that. Someone mentioned taking breaks. Thank you for mentioning that. Very, very important to take breaks. I'm going to add to this because I don't think enough people do it, is reward yourself. Not just take breaks, very important, because shouldn't be sitting all day, or if you have a standing desk, that's good. But taking breaks is important, but also reward yourself and remember to do so, even if it's after the smallest thing, like, hey, I wrote a thesis statement. Reward yourself with something that you consider to be a reward, whether it's watching something on Netflix or playing a video game for 30 minutes or an hour or having a piece of, some chocolate, whatever it is, reward yourself. I talked about writing the introduction, how it boggles my mind, but hey, whatever works for people. I did pull this quote because I wanted to say yes, 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 yes. Very important. Is the conclusion, right? It says in the conclusion, I go over the key points of the paper before ending it with a question or statement to grab the audience's attention or make one think. It's very important because I will talk about this. This is what I call the food for thought, or the BTW, the by the way conclusion. The conclusion should never just be a summary of what you just told everyone, what you already told them. Yes, you want to go over the key points of the paper, but you also want to end it with additional thought. So that's the whole point of the conclusion. Is essays are Socratic in nature, which means that they are written for the purposes of academic dialogue, meaning that you're writing, in essence, you're putting yourself in conversation with other people who are writing on that same topic. So you want to give other people, in theory, something to think about when it comes to that topic and that argument. So it's not just, here's what I talked about, the end. It's you want to envision it as a conversation with other people, other experts in that field, other subject matter experts, because that's the purpose of it's the rhetorical purpose of the conclusion. Some really interesting but pretty standard environmental conditions for writing. Leaving the home to work, possible for some, but probably not for everybody since there's a pandemic right now. If I could leave the home to work, I would, um, but I can't. Knowing where to write is a good idea. Some people, there's two of you who like to write in the kitchen. A lot of people it's are better with music in the background. Usually it was in the form of like light music or instrumental music, something like that. Several of you prefer headphones. I saw noise canceling headphones brought up. So if those work out for you, that's great. White noise in the background, right? Like just having something in the background rather than complete silence if you need that. Like if you're like someone in silence where you're like, I can't take the silence. All right, so something like I think somebody mentioned like a movie you've watched like 1,000 times, right? So like TV, a movie, something like that, just kind of in the background. Something that was brought up a lot was the time of day that works best for you in terms of productivity. Very important, obviously. Sometimes, and for some of you, you talked about living in the barracks and that certain times of days or certain days and certain times of day just plain out don't work for you because of you're living in the barracks. So knowing which time of day works best for you is definitely important in terms of having the optimum environmental conditions for writing. Complete silence. I feel that one. I get it. Important because you need a comfy body. If your body is all in pain while you're trying to work, we all know that's not fun. Because if your arm is hurting or your back is hurting or your butt is hurting, it's just going to make the writing more difficult. Being well rested. I didn't see this one come up a lot. And being calm, I didn't see that one come up a lot either. I thought I might see those more, but they only came up. This one only came up once, and this one only came up twice. Multiple screens. I love multiple screens. Some people don't, but I do like them because again, I'm a visual person, so I do like to have a lot of things open and then spread things out. A lot of people like to work in isolation, whether that's easy or difficult for you during the pandemic. I wish you the best in that, in terms of the isolation, but I understand how that can be helpful. A lot of people preferring to work at a computer versus, say, like on a pad and paper, like with a like with paper and a pen. I can understand that as well. Not feeling rushed or hurried. Yeah, I get that too. And yeah, this one's important for me as well. So having a sense of the specific food or a specific food or drink that helps you with your writing process or your work, that's also helpful. Like some people talked about like caffeine or espresso or something like that. So so environmental conditions for writing for me, I went through like several years of kind of an existential crisis because I no longer understood what environmental conditions worked well for me. It's like I couldn't find anything that worked. And so it was very stressful for me. And I'm still kind of like that. So now I just deal with it. And I got to a point, I worked in isolation for so long, and working as an academic is actually a very lonely job because you're usually working on writing that only you're working on and nobody else is working on it. So you're working by yourself all the time, or you're grading by yourself all the time. So you're constantly in isolation. So I got to a point where I was tired of being isolated, and I'm not a social person to begin with. So it got to the point where I liked to be in social environments, and you know, being around people was better for me in terms of productivity. And if I wanted to, I could put headphones on. If I didn't want to, I didn't have to. And I actually joined a work co-op here in Los Angeles, but that has since been shut down because of the pandemic. So the time of day for me is very tricky because I don't sleep well. So I tend to write when it comes to me. That I don't have the type of deadlines that you guys do, though I have had it a lot in the past, so I understand. Um, in that case, I would write when I had to. I would be like, okay, it's morning, I have to write. I have time to write now. Okay, I've got to write now. Um, I've written with music. I can do it. I can pretty much do it with anything now. I think that's just because it's my job. So, if there's, I think the only thing that bothers me is if there's like a specific noise that's really annoying to me, or if there's construction going on, or if something's really loud, or if there's like somebody's, like doing like doing the pen cap, like where they're clicking it, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna set you on fire if you don't stop that. So other than that, I think because I've been doing it for so long that I can just kind of do it, do writing wherever and whenever. Kind of like, oh, I need to do writing. Okay, great. When, where, and what. Um, so I don't really have an ideal condition anymore, just because it's just feels like a job. So I mean, it is my job. So okay, so that's everything. For the rest of the tips, that just last thing, because they were so good, that the tips you guys were providing, absolutely don't harp on yourself. Don't be too tough on yourself. You are all capable of producing great work. You are. You do just have to be. You just put the. It's just about putting the work in. And failure. Unfortunately, we don't come from a society or culture that is okay with failure. But failure is truly something from which we can learn a lot of lessons and grow from. I know you don't want to fail the class, and that's not the goal, but it's all about experimenting and trying. And as I've said in previous announcements, I'm here. The virtual communication lab is here. There's a mentorship program at Embry-Riddle that is available if you want to connect with a faculty mentor. We are here for you to help you through whatever it is you need. This is absolutely true. It has been proven in many, many, many texts, peer-reviewed texts. To get better at writing, you have to improve your reading. This is told to English language learners all the time, and it's absolutely true. So if you want to improve your writing, in particular your vocabulary, what we call your lexical density, you need to improve your reading. And not just improve your reading. I think this person also means reading more. Reading more, but also I think this person also means don't just read like stuff on the internet. Like, read higher caliber things that challenge you. That is definitely a stellar ace way to get better at both reading and writing, which are totally tied together. Absolutely stick to what works best for you if it's working. So that's the thing. That's the kind of caveat to that. Create a plan or outline before you begin writing. Yeah, don't. I've been the procrastinator. But planning and preparation, yeah, it's definitely helpful. That's that pre-writing. And this, absolutely do whatever makes you comfortable and relax before you start writing. If that means going for a run with your dog, go for a run with your dog. If that means eating a pint of ice cream, eat a pint of ice cream. Do whatever it is. I talked about this one already. Don't be ashamed or embarrassed of what you write because you can delete it. I can't tell you how many things I've written and deleted. Many things. Very important. Draft, edit, and revise. I think I've definitely hammered those home on this video. And I mentioned this one, understanding the opposition, very important. Also very important, know your topic. This means know your topic. Do what I talked about when I talked about researching. That's what that means. Spending time on understanding what other credible people are saying about your topic. Otherwise, you don't have any right to be writing about it. Have your draft read by a representative of your audience. I noted here, Virtual Communication Lab. These are expert readers. That's going to be your best simulation of that, because these are expert readers who are going to come in and say, as a reader, right, this is how I'm reading. This is how I'm reading that. That's how I read as well. As your reader, this is what I read. Is that your intent? No? Yes? Okay. And then lastly, start in the body of your paper and write. This is, I think, one that is like, I don't write the intro first or something like that. And I was like, what are you talking about? But, again, whatever works for you. Start in the body of your paper and write down all of your ideas as they come to you. There's a little bit of free writing, a little bit of the dump that I talked about. But I definitely also agree with it because just write down all of your ideas as they come to you. I don't care how messy the writing is. I mean, I care for the final draft, but just writer's block, right? Just get it, just surmount it. Just, I have ideas. I don't have ideas, but give yourself a task, give yourself that prompt, and just write down ideas. What do I think about this? Okay, maybe this, maybe that, right? It doesn't matter. Just the important thing is that you're writing. Okay, that's everything I have to say. I want to say well done. It was really enjoyable reading these, and I hope this video is not terribly long, although I fear it is. And thank you for letting me share your ideas, and I look forward to reading more.